Good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real honor that I've gotten with this radio show that every once in a while I get a call by someone who I respect saying, I know someone that you really got to meet. And a week or two ago, I got a call from an individual who really is one of these people that you've got to respect in life. And he said, Brian, you've got to meet Murray Simser. He is a gentleman that's trying to change the world. And so it's a real pleasure tonight for me to introduce you to Murray. He is the founder and CEO of something called Citizen, but it's spelled Citizn. Murray is a serial entrepreneur. He's trained in Silicon Valley and he's a Microsoft alumnus. I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a minute, but let me introduce you to Murray Simser. Murray, how are you?
I'm really well. Thanks for having me tonight, Brian.
Welcome to the show. So please tell us, what the heck is Citizen?
Well, Citizen is two things. It's the thing that came out of 20 years of increasing frustration in politics, I think. And it's also a tech company. The nature of Citizen is to wish to reinvent democracy from the ground up. And this seems like a very large undertaking to make such a ridiculous claim, it would seem. But from the standpoint of technology and from the standpoint of where we're at in the evolution of our sort of political cycles, there's an opportunity to do just that. The technology can do exactly what I want. I want to see if I can make society want what I'm building. And what I'm building is a social network for democracy that will produce the single most predictive data set there is in each polity with respect to politics, period. And it'll be owned by the people of each country.
So this is what, a poll that people get to decide and vote on policies?
Well, polling is the mechanisms that we put into place over years and years of managing democracy to try to best express what the masses want. And so what we did, I'm an economist, you take a statistical model, take a sample of people, and you try to have them express what they want, and that has to best represent what's out there. And that's about as good as it gets. The other way is to look at public data and try to interpret sentiment, but there's no real correlation between sentiment and reality when it comes to legislative bodies. So no, we're not a polling company. We're going to measure every single person's desire about every single thing going on in government, period. This is a real-time dashboard of how the people are feeling about each decision the government's making. And that data set will materially alter the fabric of politics, because politics runs, as you know, on data.
You know, it's interesting. I had a conversation at the dinner table with my sons just recently, and one of them went to school in Switzerland, and I guess they have plebiscites and referenda on just about everything. And he said the problem is that sometimes people make bad decisions, and the majority ends up overlording it on the minority. What do you think?
Yeah, well, the oppression of the majority is the oldest problem in democracy. I mean, Churchill says it well, that the only thing worse than democracy is every other system. So, it's the best we've got. Democracy is a fundamental concept, and in particular, the canton system where people put up their cards. It's almost like a soccer penalty to vote in the town square. It's a really good model, but the oppression of the masses can take hold. We're not talking about changing representative democracy as it exists today. We still think we ought to have representatives in Parliament. We think Parliament is a beautiful infrastructure. But the problem with Parliament right now is that the people are fighting over stuff that doesn't do any benefit to us, the people. And so we want to reinvigorate our representatives by actually being able to express to those representatives exactly what we want. So instead of them having to fight over how to get our attention, they can fight over how best to implement our policies. We think by organizing the people in this fashion, the people sort of stand up, they own it. And at the end of the day, they do more for their societies by doing this and spending 5-10 minutes a day on an application that looks substantially like LinkedIn. And the business model is substantially LinkedIn for democracy, memberships and ads. At the end of it, the people get represented. There's no more questions of diversity and inclusion and is this tribe out and in and that one's out and this color's in and that one's out, male in, male out. When you measure everybody's desires, full stop, you can't ignore anybody. That alters the fabric of politics.
What about participation? How can we ensure that we've got participation high enough that we actually have a representative result in the end?
them now, and therein lies the point. I'll argue this: we actually asked ourselves that question when we were building this, and we wondered how could we best assemble the technologies. You know, at the end of the day, it's a database, right? But how do you put a wrapper around that database to make it interesting for people to participate? God knows every polling company's put an app out. Nobody uses them. So at the end of the day, well, they use them, but they use them at the same rate as they used to use them for the phone calls or for the rest of it. So you're not getting these large sample sizes. The thing here, we're going to make it attractive to people. We're going to make it interesting to people because ultimately we're going to pay them to do it. Okay. There's nothing so interesting as that, which is an investment in yourself. And we believe that by, roughly speaking, using an investment banking model that allows investors to build this, and then ultimately knowing those investors, when they invest, that we're going to sell this to the users and that all the profits thereafter go into a fund that the users control. We think that's going to be significant incentive to get people onto the platform. So first, it's a social media platform. You don't need any training to use it. Anybody without education, even if you're not fancy or maybe they don't have the connections you have, Brian, they're going to be able to use this. And whether you're that person or Brian Crombie, you're going to be co-equal in the sphere of that data set. You're going to be represented accurately. Most important of all, once you actually structure that, the quantity of money I'm talking about throwing off per year within the fabric of this company in Canada alone could be billions of dollars in profit. Now imagine that money goes into a fund that looks a lot like a lottery fund or OMERS or teachers or CPP or something like this, and it's administered on behalf of the people, and that the people, through universal plebiscite on the app itself, decide what to do with that money. All of a sudden you have more than just a, hey, can you come give me your opinion? You have an absolute power base that the people can attach themselves to. I don't want serfs in a digital world in our country. This is Canada and every other great democracy on earth. I want a full democracy where people participate at a level that meets a standard, and that standard is called informed consent, and we're going to deliver it.
We're chatting tonight with Murray Simser, who's developing a social networking app like LinkedIn for politics that's going to be able to poll all of us on all of our views for different policies and inform our representatives in Ottawa and Queen's Park or wherever what we want. And so they actually will hopefully do what we want. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Murray in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. This is fascinating. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're having a chat tonight with Murray Simser. He is the founder and CEO of Citizen, a democracy's social network, an app that he is going to tell us a lot more about and how he's going to reinvent politics and democracy, I think. Let me tell you a little bit about Murray. He is the inventor of societal networks and the creator of the capitalist philosophy of societalism. He is a Silicon Valley alumnus and a serial tech entrepreneur whose first love is politics in all of its forms. Those two worlds collided in 2016. As a result, he founded and leads Citizen, democracy's social network and the first societal network. I've got to ask him what societal. Murray led the worldwide commercialization efforts of many well-known technologies at Microsoft and at several Silicon Valley startups, some of which he founded. During his career, he served on public, private, and not-for-profit boards of directors. As CEO, he led public and private companies, generated hundreds of millions in new shareholder value, raised over $100 million in capital, and led many complex transactions. His passion is helping young and young at heart entrepreneurs learn and become our next generation of leaders. He speaks at university entrepreneurship programs and was recently appointed startup mentor and adjunct professor at IE University's Business School Venture Lab in Madrid. Fantastic. Madrid might be fun. Murray speaks and writes English and French with equal proficiency. He graduated with an economics degree from the University of Ottawa and later sat on their Alumni Association Board of Directors that is responsible for engaging the 250,000-person alumni community throughout the globe. He has lived and worked in London, New York City, Seattle, San Diego, Calgary, Montreal, and now makes his home in Toronto. Murray, what an impressive background. And you speak English and French, but you're in Madrid, so you should be like speaking Spanish as well, no?
Well, I should be speaking Spanish. I believe that IE University does most of their programming in English because they're a pan-global business school, architecture school, and law school. So and I'm actually in Toronto, right at Yonge and Bloor, for those of us that can see where I'm at. But the side benefits of that appointment at the university would be grand with the weather in Madrid, if ever air travel was going to be allowed again.
You know, this citizen idea sounds really quite fascinating. I think one of the big issues is going to be getting people to participate and making sure
Yes.
that your participation level is high enough. And I got to tell you, I've been involved in federal, provincial, and municipal campaigns, and getting people out to vote is a massive challenge. And one of the things that is interesting is you get a very different result depending on turnout. And you probably know the statistics, but if the same people had voted in Justin Trudeau's first election as had voted in the previous election, Stephen Harper would have won.
Right.
And it was a substantial incremental participation in that 2019 vote that was primarily younger and more ethnic on average than the previous election that caused Justin Trudeau to become prime minister. And then the vote went down in the subsequent election, and you know some of the turnout might be the reason. Not necessarily how the average person has changed their view if everyone turned out, but it was the actual people that came out to vote. And you know, in the statistics are that if the same people had come out to vote for the first Barack Obama election had voted in the previous election, Barack Obama would not have been elected. What it was a dramatic, several million person increase in turnout that elected Barack Obama. And again, in the midterms, when he didn't fare as well, the turnout went down again. So turnout ends up changing sort of the electoral outcome dramatically. And so I've got to believe it's going to change the outcome for referendum or policy or plebiscites as well.
Yes.
And then in municipal elections, I found it really interesting. If you had an active campaign for mayor, you could get a reasonably good turnout. But the ballot included often a choice for mayor, a choice for councillor, and a choice for trustee, and sometimes, something more as well. And the percentage participation went down by like 10 or more points between the 40 or 50% of the people that voted for mayor, the 40% that voted for councillor, and the 20% that would vote for the trustee. In other words, if you make people think too many questions and answer too many questions, they only pay attention to the top one, the one that they really have formed a point of view on. And then I guess the final thing that I would tell you is that, a lot of these referendum and plebiscites that have been put forward in California and other places get voted on by a really small minority of the population. Now, the one, however, that is very supportive of your idea is the highest turnout that has ever existed in a democracy. I understand you're a student of this. You probably know this far better than I. The only time that a democracy has had there's never been a time that a democracy has had as high a vote as a communist country where you mandate that everyone votes. The highest time was in the Quebec referendum when the vote was over 97%. The turnout was over 97%. And it turned, as you know, 49.9 to 50.1. So my question to you is, how are you going to get justifiably believable answers without turnout, or how are you going to get the turnout?
Well, let's be crystal clear. Without turnout, there's none of it. Okay, there's no politics, there's no government, there's no democracy, and there's certainly going to be no citizens. So I don't wish to sort of say turnout's a non-issue. Turnout is the only issue. And let me just tell you a little bit about me. I cut my teeth while I was at university, working for a party in Ottawa, helping run campaigns, volunteering on campaigns, working in 3 member of Parliament's offices, Mac Harb, Dennis Mills, and for Jean Chrétien at the OLOO, and the official leader of the opposition's office when it was just across the street from West Block. And they sort of, I understand the world of engaging the ground game and the importance of a productive, efficient campaign that's going to get the vote out. I've done it at the investiture level. I've done it at the actual election level. And, I like to say that my sort of crowning commitment that I made to the politics of the country at the time was that I was actively involved in the Quebec referendum as a young man. That was the closest thing to ripping my heart apart back in the day. And, me and my friends all left Toronto and went to Montreal and ate in restaurants and paid huge tips and left little Canadian flags stuck through the money. There were no credit cards back then, so you had to pay cash. And, we've been at this a long time. The truth of the matter is turnout, just like winning the election, you mentioned, if those had voted, then this one would have won. And if those had voted, that one would have won. The fact of the matter is, that's why the prime minister is the prime minister on, the next day. Whoever wins, wins. The fact is, winning is becoming a whole lot less about democracy and a whole lot more about social media. And I'll just make this plain. Hosting a convention, an event, getting an article written, even going on a national broadcast can't compete with one single social media post that can get you 14 million views in 15 minutes. Okay, there is no electoral structure that can compete with that share of voice. Just think about the basics now. Share of voice. It's impossible to achieve in the sort of 19th century infrastructure that we call the democratic landscape today. Today, we actually had an election for the first time where a party did not do a ground game. Okay, the NDP. I mean, that was unimaginable before. Now, if that means that you can get elected by just posting stuff on social media, I'm not sure that's a fulsome democracy. I'm not sure that's a place where the individuals are going to be heard. What that is an aristocratic pyramid, and the person with the loudest megaphone will get elected every time. That's not the world that we signed up to live in. That's not what, generally speaking, Western constitutions represent, and it's certainly not the Enlightenment ethic or ethos. What we want is every person to be represented, and through the construction of all of those opinions for us to come to consensus that is going to improve our society, not get some woman or man elected because they're popular. That does nothing for policy. And we're starting to see it more and more with these conferences, these massive conferences that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to put on, are these grand parades that are really nothing more than Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn post and Twitter posting activities. Whether or not the conferences succeed is completely irrelevant, because my support count went up, even though the campaign failed. We're living in crazy world. Okay, you don't have to win to win. You don't have to be democratic to be the prime minister. Everything is topsy-turvy. It's time that we, as the people, decide to do something different. And I'm not proposing crazy cuckoo stuff. I'm proposing a very simple way to bring us all together that's going to allow everybody to come to a consensus in a structured way that's backed by research and science. And that is a Stanford study called America in One Room that shows us the formula for this. And we've baked it into the system, and then we've wrapped it in a bunch of AI that'll make it more productive. And Citizen, I think, now I'm going to get back to the answer to your question. So how do you get people to use it? You can't ask them to come and do polling. Nobody really wants to get on and answer questions. That is not a productive use of your time. However, social media is instructive in how we do it. And if we can give people an easy, fun, cool way to engage with their governments, and that they know that this is going to be productive, we can elevate the average citizen in Canada to a very powerful person. And we can give them money that can allow them to back their collective desires if the government doesn't listen. Power is our dopamine.
Okay, so I certainly agree with you in regards to diminishing the power of the person with the loudest or the best funded megaphone. I do think that social media at times gives people that have a very minority position an incredible view. And there was a posting that I read today on social media that said something to the effect of, if COVID happened before social media, everyone would have had a vaccine by now. In other words, that it's the the small minority of anti-vaxxers that have been able to and/or politics and partisan politics in the United States primarily that has been able to mess up sort of people's belief in regards to what good science might suggest is the right thing to do. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but it was a point of view that was expressed today.
No, but you're correct. Yeah, you're correct.
Social media may have been damaging to that.
Yeah.
But you still got to get participation. You make it fun, fine.
Yeah.
And you talked about the NDP and their lack of ground game. I got to tell you how many teenagers I've met or young people I've met who will tell you. I've got an interview that's coming out next week with 2 millennials that said, they love Jag Meets TikTok and they learn a lot from it. And so I think that he's done an incredibly good job of that. It didn't turn into votes, though. So it was a very helpful, interesting process that he exploited. But in the end, he didn't win with it. And Aaron O'Toole made a strategic decision to do a lot of his campaigning from a TV studio in the basement of a hotel in Ottawa.
Right.
Well, Justin Trudeau was out actually doing the old typical rallies, even if they were less attended than usual. And in the end, Justin Trudeau won. And he was able to target specific ridings and do it. Anyway, so I think that getting your participation up and making that app exciting is clearly going to be your number one job. But then in addition, I do think that even if things are exciting, people get bored after a while. Their attention span just won't last for a whole bunch of questions. So, how can you do, I can understand how you could ask about Quebec separation. You could get 97% turnout. But on the whole plethora of things that government has to deal with, I remember just in Mississauga, they did this one survey once about the budget. And people had big points of view on what the overall tax rate would be. But on a bunch of the other items in the municipal budget, the participation rate was like less than a single-digit percentage point.
Correct.
How do you do that?
That isn't, well, have you ever done a survey?
I've done too many surveys.
The point I'm trying to make flippantly is if you have to do 20 of those surveys a day, you're certainly going to burn out and be done. There's no real reason for you to do those surveys. You're not benefiting from it. It's not benefiting you. You can't measure it. But there are a whole range of psychological principles in the world of social networks that come into play that are really interesting to us. So first off, the whole concept of the social network is a network that will grow a bit organically by virtue of the relationships and people being brought into the fold. Number two, this isn't just a place where people are going to be polling in a LinkedIn style environment. So news feeds are full of, polling. That would be sort of anathema to the goals of it, because you're going to lose people. And you're right. People have to be able to literally participate in the fullness of their government on their phone. That's the promise of this thing. And if they can do that and tell the government what they want, and they can measurably see what they're doing, we can bring a concept called gamification to the table that in building the app and structuring the app encourages behaviors that are positive rather than encouraging behaviors that are negative. For instance, if we're going to have a user reputation score. Uber, before it had a user reputation score, had a lot of problems with people behaving poorly in the back of cars. For instance, wrecking them, pouring pop on stuff, perhaps being rowdy, slamming doors, smashing windows. As soon as reputation score came in, guess what happened? Well, LinkedIn's another example. How do you encourage people to sort of behave? Well, you encourage them to behave properly, but at the end of the day, there has to be something core that draws them in. And what's going to draw them in here is the money to change their society. The quantity of money that we're talking about is sufficient to displace some government spending. It's also significant enough to replace or fix most sort of level 1 or 2 Maslow needs in most societies. And so as a consequence, if that money is available, then all people have to do is spend some time on a daily basis in a very cool way. You get a notification, you participate, come into a debate, don't. Whatever it is, but that data set is being produced over time. The money that's being produced should be incentive enough for people to come together. And I believe that over time, just like Facebook took sort of 15 years to fulsomely enter the market, and LinkedIn took the same period of time, we're estimating about a decade before we hit full flight. which is all electoral age adults on the platform. And so there's a different way to behave when you're trying to attract the younger generation, which will probably be the likely early adopters of this thing. There's a different way to behave when you get into the early majority, the late majority, and then of course the late adopters. But at the end of it all, we believe that the dopamine hit that social media gives will be present here in this one, thus creating an interest in continuing to use it. But that ours will be a positive psychological reinforcement mechanism, whereas most social media platforms are negative reinforcement mechanisms that harm people.
We're chatting with Murray Simser, the CEO and founder of something called Citizen, which is an app, social media app that he's going to launch that's going to tell our electoral government what we think and how they should vote. Sounds pretty fantastic if it works. So take a break and have some messages for our people that are going to give us the monetary incentive to listen, or at least pay our way. And we're going to come back with Murray in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about really not representative democracy, but complete democracy, where everyone's view on every issue actually influences government policy. And it's going to be by way of a social media app called Citizen that our guest tonight, Murray Simser, is the CEO and founder and promoter of, because the guy is so excited about this. It's fantastic. Let me tell you a little bit more about Murray, if I could. As I said, Citizen is a democracy social network. Its principal aim is to generate capital to eliminate Maslow's level 1 and 2 needs the world over. Sounds interesting. I have to ask about that. It does this using investment capital that expects a fulsome return. The combination is a new form of good capitalism called societalism. Sounds interesting. Yes. His background is really quite interesting. He's an adjunct professor and a startup mentor at IE Business School in Madrid. He's invited for 1 quarter entrepreneurship, teaching young student entrepreneurs and recent grads how to win. He's been the chairman, director, and CEO or president of several different public and private companies where he's advised company executives, boards, and entrepreneurs, resulting in significant shareholder value creation, including Deploy Technologies, which is now acquired by, now called Body and Mind, president, CEO, and board of directors. Another company called AI Software Company, where he is president, CEO, and on the board of directors. University of Ottawa, where he's on the board of directors and on the Alumni Association. Microsoft, where he was worldwide director of incubation. What is incubation?
It's how we integrate companies we buy into the commercial environment across the world. So we incubate the ideas, which are actually companies that were created by other corporations, and then we Microsoft them up, and then we integrate them into the Microsoft world through a whole range of different activities.
Microsoft them up. Sounds fascinating. He was founder and president of One Source Partners, LLP. He was the founder, chief client officer, head of Canada and emerging market subsidies for eAssist Global Solutions. He was vice president business development for Single Point. He's got a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the University of Ottawa. And
social science.
Social science. Oh, I apologize. You know, what an incredible background you've got. And I understand, as you were saying, that you worked in the PMO, or at least the official opposition leader's office.
Yeah, I didn't work at the PMO. My business partner, Chris Wolfenberg, worked in the PMO. I worked in the OLOO when I was at university as volunteer. So we've run if you look at who's on the team, there's not one of us that hasn't had our hands somewhere in politics at some point. But Chris actually worked quite closely with your friend Sergio, as a matter of fact. And when I introduced Sergio to the team, Chris said, "Oh, they went through war stories and all the rest of it." Once you have it in your blood, you understand the concept first and foremost, that is politics. You understand first and foremost the concept of being able to attract and generate attention for something. I mean, that's what a campaign is. At the end of the day,
you start quite an attractive board of directors or board of ambassadors. So you've attracted that kind of people like you would in a campaign.
And that's precisely the reason. You sort of asked me the question just before we went on break. How do you attract people, and how do you do? If you're just asking people to answer questions, there's nothing attractive about that. First thing I decided to do was to go assemble a team of extremely powerful, capable, credible people that had the network, the reach, and the credibility to be able to stand up and say, look, this guy's got an idea that's going to work. I'm a reasonably well-known businessman, but I don't have the celebrity of these people that are on my board. One of the original employees of Microsoft, for instance, in the original founding photo, and in the Smithsonian, couple of ministers of cabinet, foreign. When I say foreign ministers, I mean ministers of other countries. The Solicitor General of Ontario, the founder of TEDx, one of the biggest VCs in Quebec. Some of the biggest investors in the country are sitting on this board, and the reason they're sitting on this board is because they know that this has a real shot at fundamentally altering the calculus of politics and improving the lives of people. We talk a lot about that, but we don't do a lot about it. And I've watched for 30 years since I was at the OLOO to sort of say, what's changed? And the answer is nothing's changed, and it's getting worse, and people are being disaffected even more.
I think it's getting worse. I take a look at the power of the leader, the partisanship within the parties, the fact that one faction and there's this philosophy, and you've quoted your Stanford University research, and I'd love to ask you about that. But there's been a lot of research that suggests that one of the problems with politics is to win in the party, you got to go to the extreme of that party. And then what you end up having is people only on the extremes, and no one's there in the middle to represent what people really think. And that, I think, certainly has happened in the Democratic and Republican parties in the United States.
It's happened everywhere.
It's happening here in Canada as well. And so, and even in nominations where one ethnic group or one demographic group, a soccer club or whatever, if they can get enough people together to pack a church basement or a gymnasium and win a nomination fight, that ends up being the person that's the nomination. And getting that nomination is the gateway to being competitive in the election. Like the primaries in the United States, the primaries end up being more important than the actual election, because you almost know a lot of the times whether it's going to go liberal, conservative, Democratic, or Republican. And so getting the nomination ends up being the more important electoral success. So I think it's
certainly the case here.
Yeah, I agree. And so I think it's gotten worse. That said, social networks have also gotten a bad name.
Yes.
We've had, the example in the last little while of the criticism of Facebook and social media companies being called to testify at the House of Commons and in Capitol Hill in the United States. With all the criticism to social networks, how is Citizen going to be different?
Well, let's first start with the technology itself. The technology. There are two answers to this question. One is a technical answer, and one is a human answer. Okay, and I'm going to deal with both. The technical answer is you can't have algorithms moderating the content that people on the platform are looking at that has an intention to manipulate the person who is in the newsfeed. Okay, this is fundamentally not right in a democracy. So if I am deploying social media technology, for all intents and purposes, is the equivalent of a live newspaper for everything going on in the whole world, and it's just constantly flowing in front of you, who decides what goes in front of you shouldn't be nefarious or shouldn't be used to affect outcomes or harm people, whether it's through a third party or a primary actor. That is currently what is going on. Facebook has an incentive, and this isn't a criticism of Facebook, okay? Facebook's business model is beautiful. They've done incredible things, and I'm a bit contrarian in this regard, in that I love the technology. I just don't think that it's monolithically acceptable to use that technology for every single application in its current form, okay? So the first thing that has to happen technically is you have to have an algorithm whose intention is what the country wants, not what the corporation that runs that technology wants. That would be like Microsoft deciding what goes in your email because they run Office 365. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And in a democracy, we don't want a mediator, okay? Think back to your Marshall McLuhan. Let's channel him a little bit. The medium's the message. So Facebook isn't about carrying a message between a person and a government. It's about itself. What we need is a medium whose job it is to carry the message of that individual to the other, so that the medium does not become the message, okay? That the content on the medium is the message. That's why we're selling data. That's why memberships will be available for people to interrogate that data, and that only certain data will be available for people to interrogate. At the end of it all, you solve the technical problem by making the algorithms work properly, okay? So that's that's the easy part, actually. Hard part is how you structure a corporation and organize it so that there are no business incentives in there to continue misbehaving, okay? So the first thing is that you have to have an ownership structure that disallows this. And so what we've decided to do, I walked into Parliament one day and I looked up and I was sort of like this, and I was shocked when I was a kid that I saw people sitting above us rather than down on the floor, okay, where the parliamentarians were. And as a kid, I was shocked to see fancy people like parliamentarians are below the people who are up in the galleries. There's a reason for that. And we think the ownership structure of the social network called Citizen should be the same. People are going to own this. They're going to dictate all of the terms. They're going to have a governance model called the ambassadors group. That ambassadors group is going to be made up of the quote unquote good and great of a society of all shapes and descriptions from all stations. And their job is to act as the council that will make sure that these things are enforced upon the officers and directors of the corporation, so that those people who are working for that ambassador board and ultimately the shareholder, the people, they do the job that they're told to do. So the human element takes away the incentive, but we leave the profit incentive in place so that investors will build this for the people. The people don't have to pay for it. The investors get paid back, and the individuals get rich because the investors did that. This is virtuous capitalism on the human side. On the technical side, we build it, but only with the permission of the human side. This disallows all the negativity, badness, and harm that can come out of existing social networks, and this solves all of them. And I trust that structure will ultimately, if we are as successful as you think we're going to be, it's going to be tested by media. Media is going to come after us and say, you're just more of the same crap. And the answer is going to be, no, we're not. And they can come after us all they like. They will look under the covers and they will go, wow, okay, this thing has been structured by, for, and of the people.
Do you start in one jurisdiction so you get high usage in one area and become therefore relevant, or do you go everywhere at once?
No, we can't go everywhere at once. We're going to follow the model just like Amazon did. Amazon, when they launched, they went country by country by country. We're going to start in Canada first, okay, because it's a mid-sized country that has a lot of interesting features in it to test technologies that's relevant to other places. And then we're going to immediately follow up. Once we've had a successful launch in Canada, we have a few 100,000 people here with launches in the United States and India. And we're calling the United States and India connectivity the democracy backbone. We're going to connect the East and the West together in a democracy backbone, and that is going to then be the place where all of the other democracies are going to attach to. And collectively, all of these people are going to protect democracies all over the planet.
You say some of your thinking is influenced by this study at Stanford. Tell us a little bit about this.
So in 20, it was quite fortuitous that they published this study, because 6 months into us incorporating this company, out comes this announcement. We think we've solved the democracy problem from Stanford. And we're like, come on, do it. And they published it. And it was very simple. Okay. They took 500 people into a room in an American city. This 500 people was a cross-section of American society chosen by statisticians so that it was demographically representative. And it was it was very reputed, this study. So there were no real fundamental issues with it. They had control groups. But what they essentially did was took all these people and stuck them in a room or a convention center for a weekend and said, you're going to solve the hardest issues in society. And they all looked at each other like, yeah, right. So they did intake polling with all of these people. And as you might expect, of the 500, 70% were intractably opposed on the issues that they were going to discuss to changing their minds. So there was no way, if evidence was presented to them, that they would alter their thinking. So how could these groups of Democrats and Republicans get on and solve things? Well, the answer is they wouldn't in a traditional structure. But what was the structure that was put into place? It was called moderated discourse forums. This is the oldest trick in the book. You put a moderator in a room who has some power. You control the information that all of the people in the room get to read before they have a discussion, and through moderated discourse and dialogue and respect. It's sort of a Robert's Rules of Order, but light, okay? People ended up solving every issue. When they exit polled, and this is the astonishing part, number one, they solved all the problems, which was not predicted. And number two, only 30% of the people still held what you would call intractable views, which, by the way, is what you would expect in a normal, healthy society. You get the tales are always, there's some tales you're just never going to alter.
Well, I guess what that says is we don't talk to each other often enough anymore.
Correct. And we don't have to look at each other. So all this does is frankly create the concept of road rage in a car. Everybody becomes a big tough guy driving beyond their 3,000-pound missiles. This is even worse. And there's psychology behind this, that there's a dissociative function in an environment that is simply technical, where you're not engaging with a person. And it shows that people become, they fundamentally tend towards the evil side of their character when they're in that type of an environment. And so it's important that the development of this thing be driven by psychologists. And so in our case, we've actually been partnering with one to sort of work on this. But think about things like anti-bias filters. It's 188 cognitive biases out there. What if we could identify them in writing before somebody posts and suggests to them, hey, don't do that, do this? That's coming. Okay, that's in the engineering specification.
You can actually tell us how we can become nicer people.
Yes, we could actually do that. And the key is that I'm not the one that's going to be doing it. It's the actual people that are going to approve how these algorithms behave. So it's not going to be some like super genius, crazy group of nerds that are in the background doing all the mega mind stuff and controlling the world. It's those people who will be working on behalf of the people to develop those systems in such a way that they do exactly what you just said.
When do you launch?
Improve our societies. Sorry?
When do you launch?
Our aim is to launch in summer 2022. We are going to finish our capital raise. We're actually in the middle of a capital raise by March 10th. And between now and June, we are going to finish all the coding and all the commercial readiness, the legal work and the structuring for the Canadian launch. And the apps will be downloadable with any luck by June.
Do you have to be a certain age?
Well, of course you do. You have to be of electoral age to participate in the actual portions of it that get contributed to the data set. But anybody over the age of 13 will be able to participate with a more restricted set of features. Only those who are verified will be able to use the platform. And we have a very cool way to do verification that doesn't require you to ID up and all the rest of it.
So only citizens.
Only citizens and only people of that country. This is not a global, the social network is structured as nodes in each country, and only certain features are available globally. So you will first and primarily be in your country, but everybody in other countries and democracies will be able to support the vision, which is to reinforce democracies where they are, to defend them where they're challenged, and to give rise to them everywhere else.
Fascinating. Can we follow your progress on something, on a Twitter, on a social media site, or on something?
On LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, you certainly can, CITIZN. And you can also find us at citizen.world, CITIZN.world is our website. And mostly you can just Google us and you'll find lots of stuff.
We're chatting tonight with Murray Simser about his ambition to launch a social media vehicle that allows us to effectively vote on every single policy that the government's going to have, and tell our government what we want rather than them trying to decide what is right for us. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight, I think, having a fascinating chat with Murray Simser, who is the founder and CEO of something called Citizen. Murray, what have you not told us that you'd like to tell us, if anything?
Well, there's a really big thing here. If we succeed, and I genuinely think we have a shot at doing so, in achieving our goals, there will almost be an untightening of the political system. Today, the party system is not functioning exactly how it was intended to function. The party system was intended to organize people and get them to vote in certain directions, which we think is an important component of democracy. Parties are an important warring oppositional system to protect the countries so that infiltration can't happen, a variety of other things. But if they're only used to put wedges between people, they do more harm than they do good. And we think that that unwinding of politics is really important for politics to be productive. If everybody's at each other's throats, which is the current way, there is no productivity, none. And the people who pay for that are the people in the country, because what you end up with is increasingly extremist points of views. If we look south of the border, whatever happens there generally makes its way up here a little bit later. We're seeing that massive extremism and the intractability of the legislative process unfold. Okay, it's manifesting itself in very dangerous ways, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better. What we think is going to happen here is that if we can actually build this data set, political parties can go back to the original sort of constructive thing, which is to structure policies and offers to citizens to address their needs in a more relevant, a more calm, a less exaggerated, a less crazy, manic way that exists today. Everything is shocking. Everything is awful. Everything is no. And you know what? The next time I hear shocking and awful, and like, I don't hear it anymore. What I want are people doing the business that needs to be done. And by and large, doing it quietly and efficiently. And that hasn't been done in a long time. But there's been a lot of talking, a lot of screaming, and a lot of this, and a lot of posting, but very little legislative progress. I think there's a better way. And the better way is we tell the government what we want, and then the elected, the people who are going to get the seat that is up for grabs, have to fight for how to best implement what we need. But to do that, we need to be able to tell the government what it is that we want. And currently, we have no ability to do that whatsoever.
So I can't agree with you more. I think that if you can actually accomplish that, it'll be just spectacular. And let me tell you my own personal story. I used to be very involved in politics, and similar to you, was worked for a bunch of different people at different times. And I got involved because I wanted to change policy, and I thought that I could have an impact on policy. And I wrote speeches, and I wrote policies, and I did research, and I had a lot of fun at that. And then I found out when you got involved in party politics, all they wanted you to do was identify the vote and then get the vote out.
That's it.
And then sometimes you had a third thing, which was to discourage the other person from coming out. Often that was done by negative advertising, but sometimes it was actually done in some pretty negative ways.
Absolutely awful ways.
Are absolutely awful. And you see that in the United States, and we hear about it probably more in the United States than we hear it in Canada, but it happens in Canada. But it's the restricting people's access, making it more difficult to vote.
Memberships aren't available. There's all kinds of tricks, cutting phone lines. I mean, they're the oldest tricks in the book. And
when you think about it, when not everyone votes, and particularly when turnout is low, identifying who your supporters are and getting them to that polling station is the most important thing. But what you've lost is the whole idea of persuasion, of actually telling people what your policies are and trying to convince them, trying to persuade them that your policies are the appropriate ones to vote for. And so I had a different solution than you had, which is the Australian solution of compulsory voting. And I was going to pay people to vote, which means that since it comes from the taxes, effectively you have a disincentive to not vote because you're paying, you're not getting the benefit back. Australia doesn't get 100%, but they get close to 100% turnout. And when you turn out, you don't actually have to vote, you just have to turn out. So if someone wants to come and spoil their ballot, they have the right to say, I want to vote. But it's interesting. Once everyone turns out, you no longer have all these campaign workers going out and identifying the vote and identifying the person who's not going to vote for your person. And then you don't have the get out the vote. What people do is they actually come up with good policies and spend time persuading. They do what politics should all be about, which is the positive. And so I think that's the solution. And if you can get through your social media 100% turnout, or if I can get through my solution of compulsory voting 100% participation or close to it, that's how I think we can change politics, because we can get out of this partisan identifying the vote, get out the vote, discourage the other guy that you've got like crazy in our current party politics in Canada and the United States. Yeah. What do you think? Do you support compulsory
I
voting?
completely support anything that increases voting. But here's the real issue, and I'll close with this. Voting once every 4 years, regardless of how it's achieved, whether you have 50% of the population, 60, 70, or even 80, is kind of like Monday morning quarterbacking. The country makes decisions during the 4 years that are probably and arguably more important than the decisions made in an election. And I should think that people would want control and universal plebiscite power over that. We're going to provide it, and people won't be able to ignore it. The people will be able to be heard this way. So I think that, yes, stuff like compulsory voting, it may work in some countries, it may not work in others. Some are just a little too rebellious, they'll get mad about it. And you look at the reaction to sort of mandated vaccines, and you can sort of assume that it'd be similar for a certain percentage of the population. What we need are active and powerfully minded citizens. And if you don't have engaged, powerfully minded citizens, you have to worry about things like, will they go and vote once every 4 years? They need to be there every day. We need to run a $2 trillion economy properly and responsibly. And if you're a citizen of a democracy, you need to start acting like it. And I think that the best way to do that is to make them wealthy. And citizen is a mechanism to do both.
If you've got these people voting every day, why do you need MPs?
Well, there's the risk that you just talked about, which was the oppression of the masses. The reason you decouple the data set from the actual business of government is you want that insulating layer. Because what if the data set, for some reason, does get screwy, okay? The person who's the minister or the people who are in charge will be able to say, look, there's something wrong with that. We're not going to follow that advice. And they live by that decision, fair enough. But we don't want direct democracy in a pocket where the whole country could, say, launch a war, or a whole country could launch an economic trade war or something like this. You don't want that there. What you want is an electorate that says, this is what we want. And then what you want is a professional civil service and a professional legislative government to implement those desires in the best way and in the best interests of the people. And the people, as you rightly point out, don't always know what that is.
Murray Simser, President, Founder, CEO of Citizen. How can we follow you again?
You can check us out at citizen.world, at CITIZN, on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.
I want to be one of your ambassadors. Thanks for joining us. And
You're
thank
in.
you, everyone else, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. That's the Brian Crombie radio show on Saga 960. You can get me every night, 6 o'clock on 960 a.m. in the Western Toronto area, or you can stream me online from around the world at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts are available on briancrombie.com. The videos are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and the podcasts are on Audible, Apple, and Speakeasy. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.